Welcome to the Unconnected webinar from the Wireless Broadband Alliance and part of the World Wi-Fi Day celebration. My name is Tiago Rodrigues. I'm with the WBA and I run the World Wi-Fi Day program within the Alliance. Thank you so much for joining this webinar and without further delays, let me introduce you the panelists that we have lined up for today's webinar. So we'll have Sonia George, the Executive Director of the Alliance for the Affordable Internet. We'll have Molly Fowler, Senior Urban Strategist at Intersection. We'll have Miguel Gamino, the CEO of the City and Council of San Francisco. We'll have Shrikant Shenwai, the CEO of the Wireless Broadband Alliance. And we are going to have as well with us Adlan Felah, the CEO and founder of the Meravides Research. And Adlan is going to be our moderator for this webinar. Today's agenda, we'll have basically two components. We'll start with a presentation from Adlan on a research that Meravides developed for WBA on Urban and Connected, and then we'll follow that presentation with a panel discussion with the rest of all the panelists. I want to remind you all that you can post during the webinar questions to the different panelists. For that, you just need to use the chat box on the GoToWebinar application, right on your down right side of the screen. And once more, thank you so much for attending. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And now I would like to pass to Adlan. So over to you, Adlan.
Thank you, Tiago. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Adlan Felah, and I'm the founder of Meravides. We are a boutique analyst firm focusing on wireless infrastructure markets. Today I'm pleased to present some of the key findings of some research we conducted on behalf of the WBA regarding the state of the urban and connected in 18 large cities across the world, as well as their related international regions. The agenda for today will include the scope and methodology of the research that we have conducted. We'll present some of the key findings and provide a feel about the state of the urban and connected. Starting with the key findings, the total urban population is estimated at 3.8 billion humans today. 2.2 billion of them, and that is 57%, remain unconnected, which means they don't enjoy neither a fixed nor a mobile broadband connection on a regular basis, and are therefore left out of the digital age and all the opportunities that the internet brings. As expected, there are huge differences between cities when it comes to urban and connected. From the lowest number of unconnected, as in London, UK, with 8%, all the way to Lagos, Nigeria, with more than 88%. This is not a surprising result, and it is well in line with overall regional and continental differences explained by gaps in economic, social, technology, and telecom regulatory environments. What came as a surprise, however, for us during the course of the research was the shocking results for large, sophisticated cities like New York, LA, or Shanghai, where we found more than 25% of urban citizens still remaining unconnected, either because they can't afford the service or the device. In the US, for example, minorities such as blacks and Latinos dominate the urban and connected because they do suffer from social inequalities. So in the case of developed cities like New York or LA, it's more an issue of affordability than coverage. In other parts of the world, main reasons include both the lack of coverage and availability as well as affordability. In terms of the scope and methodology, what we did was contact the top officials of those 18 notable cities across the world, which we agreed on with the WPA to look for in the different regions of the world. First step was really to define what unconnected meant. And we defined it as those who do not enjoy a regular access to any form of broadband, normally as part of a subscription, either fixed or mobile. So as part of the research process, we not only contacted city officials in those cities, but also the national telecom regulators in each of the countries that were located, and scanned through official papers from the authorities and international organizations such as the ITU, World Bank, OECD, and many others. One of the issues we found during the process was that the broadband definitions differ greatly between countries. In the most extreme cases, like in India, 256 to 512 kilobytes per second speeds are considered broadband, while a minimum of 3 megabytes per second speeds applies in the US. So huge differences in terms of definitions there. In many cases, we see 2 megabytes per second to seem to be the most common measured use in the cities and countries. We looked at both internet users, fixed broadband lines, mobile broadband coverage, broadband definitions, and the average income per region and city. And the results are presented here in the proportion of urban population unconnected to broadband by region. So as indicated previously, 57% of the urban world population remains unconnected. And we obviously see great differences between regions and between countries in the same region. We even see differences within the same country between cities. For example, in APAC, which is Asia Pacific, the situation between South Korea and India is radically different, as we can all imagine. Diving down to the actual cities, as I mentioned previously, we expected huge differences, and then I had mentioned the extremes of London at 8% and Lagos at 88%. But what came as a surprise, as indicated earlier, was really the situation of large, sophisticated cities, both in the US and in China, for example. We believe that in those situations, the urban citizens still remain unconnected because they can't afford the service or the device. We don't believe it's a broadband coverage issue as much as it is an affordability issue. In the rest of the world, in situations, for example, like New Delhi or Johannesburg, etc., there is a very high level of inequality as well, which results into a situation where broadband coverage sometimes is very limited to those market segments that can afford high broadband services, which is shown in this next slide, which indicates that broadband urban penetration is highly correlated to income. And this is not surprising. You know, income levels are closely related to broadband adoption in both developed and developing tendencies. For example, the average monthly income in European cities is about $3,600, and that translates into an 88% penetration of broadband. Similarly, in North America, the average monthly income is $3,500 and translates into 80% of broadband penetration. In the Middle East of Africa, which remains the least connected region in terms of broadband, the average monthly income level at $1,300 only translates into a penetration of 27%. So the more income, the more broadband penetration. Not a surprising result. But more income implies not only the deeper pockets, but the greater ability to actually have a higher level of education, including greater computer and internet literacy. There are quite a number of obstacles to broadband urban access. I mean, we've touched on the cost of subscription, but there's also other reasons. The most common reasons we believe why many urban citizens don't have broadband, as mentioned above, is the relative high cost of the broadband service. And not only the service, but the device, the smartphones, and can represent an obstacle, which is of course linked to lower levels of income. And this is true both for developed and developing countries. Just that in developing regions, we can add the additional factor of lower broadband availability due to lower network investments in areas of the city that are dominated by a poor segment of the population. And we see that clearly in big cities like New Delhi, Lima, Mexico, etc. The wealthier neighborhoods get a primary investment into higher broadband technologies like HFC. So although we haven't quantified the percentage of each of the factors, the evidence suggests that the cost of subscription and broadband availability are the two top contributors to the urban digital divide. So as far as my final remarks, when we started this research, we really came with the assumption in our minds that broadband was a given and that it was available in most cases. And we were shocked to come up with the staggering number of 2.2 billion urban citizens remaining unconnected, because we came with the idea that it was mostly a rural phenomenon with the so well-known the digital divide between urban and rural areas, and it isn't. The reasons, as we have seen, are multiple. But affordability and social inequality are the main contributors to the digital divide. We believe that governments alone can't meet this challenge, and operators alone either, because they have financial restrictions on serving the most profitable market segments. So we believe there's a need for creative public-private partnerships, and I hope we can touch on those during the panel today. We have looked at fixed broadband. We have looked at 3G/cellular 4G technologies. And we believe that in the frame of a mixed bag of technologies, Wi-Fi can actually play a big role in reducing the urban digital divide. And having said so, I would like to welcome my panelists and start with some few questions. Perhaps a quick reaction on those numbers. Perhaps starting with you, Shrikant, are those in line with your understanding of the urban situation?
So yeah, thank you, Adlan, for this, I think, very wonderful and insightful data that you shared here. And as you said, even from WBA perspective, when we thought of commissioning this particular study, the question we had in our mind was, whenever we talked about unconnected, people generally think of rural and remote locations and the population that resides there. What probably wasn't clear, at least to us, was what is the scale of unconnectivity within the urban spaces. And that's what we're hoping to establish with this research. And I can see some of the data points, in fact, are very intriguing and insightful in a way that we can see that there's quite a significant urban population that still needs to be supported with connectivity in some form and shape. And clearly, we believe that from a technology perspective, the role that unlicensed technologies in particular Wi-Fi will play in supporting that connectivity, it just sort of validates that there's a growing need to proliferate Wi-Fi-based connectivity to make more affordable connectivity available to people around the world, including in urban spaces.
This is great. Actually, I would like to just very quickly on since you responded to this. What is the Wi-Fi Day, and where this initiative came from?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, World Wi-Fi Day is certainly it's happening for the first time, but it's a unique worldwide initiative that has been organized by Wireless Broadband Alliance. But in cooperation with the leadership of Connected City Advisory Board. This is a board that has city leaders from around the world, and that includes leading cities from U.S. Such as San Francisco and of course Miguel is a part of the initiative of Country Advisory Board together with New York, but also other cities like Barcelona, others. So this is the initiative that has come out of the WBA and the Connectivity Advisory Board, looking at the issue of urban unconnectivity and the worldwide unconnectivity, and how Wi-Fi can support activities in that area. But fundamentally, this is also to celebrate and recognize the economic value that Wi-Fi generates for consumers, for communities, and the economy at large. And that's what essentially we hope to do through World Wi-Fi Day. And it is being driven essentially based on what we call as the Hope for Connectivity Charter, which talks about how people can help, how the various players from the industry and stakeholders can pitch in to support the activities. More details are, of course, available on the website, which is www.worldwifiday.com.
Excellent. All right, Sonia, Jorge, you're Executive Director for the Alliance for Affordable Internet. Reactions to this research, and also can you tell us, what is your mission?
Sure, thank you. And thank you to the Wireless Broadband Alliance to do the webinar and for inviting me. As you can tell from our name, the Alliance for Affordable Internet, some of the numbers that you just shared with us very much speak to our concern and to the reason for our existence. The Alliance for Affordable Internet is a global coalition of public, private, and civil society organizations that have come together to work on policy and regulatory reform because we identified a particular gap in thinking about affordability in the sector, precisely because of the reasons that you just mentioned in your presentation, that often coverage is not the main barrier to access and adoption, but there are other kinds of structural issues and affordability that are important for people not only in urban areas but also in rural areas to be able to afford the internet. And so the Alliance has come together, and our mission is very much to work through policy and regulatory frameworks in such a way that we will reduce the cost of basic broadband connectivity, and of course in that way enabling hundreds of millions of people to get connected. One of the things that we do to try to understand what is the state of affordability and what is the state of connectivity in the world is also a lot of research. And in fact, the numbers that you just shared with us very much corroborate a lot of the research that we've done so far, as well as the research that my colleagues at the wider Web Foundation have done, that not only there is a huge problem for urban populations, especially the urban poor, when it comes to connectivity, but I would even go farther. We did a study more recently that I hope many who are listening to the webinar might be interested, that looks specifically at women's access to the internet and the differences. And not only the numbers are staggering, just as yours, in terms of the percentages of those that are unconnected, but when you look from a gender perspective, women are 50% more likely to be unconnected than men. So if you add on top of social inequality and affordability that lens, you have an even more bleak picture in many developing countries. And we also did this research in 10 large urban cities across the different regions, but focusing on the urban poor. So unfortunately, that's the reality that we have in front of us. But it's one reality that should not be a scary thought. In fact, it should inspire us all, as it inspires us at the Alliance, to do the kind of work that we do to change that picture, to make sure that the resources are going in the right direction and are being invested where they are needed. And I'm sure we'll talk about it further down through the discussion. But most importantly, that policymakers understand that they have to look at the different segments of the population when they think about not only policy, but when they think about targeted programs to address the disparities that exist in their countries, in their cities, in the society. And so, unfortunately, I have to say that your numbers not only corroborate, but the reality is that we have a lot to do. And just one last point, if I may, if that's okay. One of the key findings from our most recent affordability report that we publish every year was that the kind of generally accepted threshold for affordability at 5% of monthly incomes that has been defined as the affordability target by the UN and the Broadband Commission in our sector. One of the things that we found through our research is that 5% threshold not only is inadequate, but in fact allows for great inequalities to be masked in kind of aggregate numbers. And so that's another thing that I think is very interesting in your research and also in our research is that we really try to unpack the reality. And what our research showed is that if you unpack the realities in the countries by income levels, and we did some very detailed analysis by income quintiles across the 51 countries that we cover in our research, what we, of course, found was that even in countries that pride themselves for having met the threshold, the affordability threshold of 5% of monthly incomes, at the aggregate level, the income disparities in those countries are so great that when you break it down by income quintiles, for the most part, the bottom 20% in none of the countries actually can get to even close to the affordability target, but in most developing countries, in fact, close to 40 to 60% of the population in most countries cannot get to that affordability target.
Okay, well, excellent, Sonia. Well, there are some interesting examples today of real deployments that can solve the urban and connected issue. I'd like to start maybe with Molly from Intersection, a very exciting project, Link NYC. Tell us about, and I'm sure we can all guess vision and goals here, but tell us about the deployment. Tell us about where you got so far and what's the uptake, and what your overall impressions.
Sure. Thank you, Aslan, and thank you to the Wireless Broadband Alliance for having me. I'm really proud to be here to represent Link NYC. It's a project that we really think is moving the needle on the digital divide here in New York City. And the numbers that you presented today really line up with what we understand and have seen on the ground here in New York. 1 in 4 New Yorkers don't have access to broadband. When you think about the size and scale of that in a city like this, it's pretty staggering. And connecting this particular population, could not be more important. We all take for granted how much of our daily lives are moving online, whether it's applying for jobs, connecting with opportunity, with family, with friends, even finding loved ones. More and more of our day is happening online, and we have populations that are getting left in the dust. So Link NYC was a project that we responded to a challenge by the City of New York to reinvent the payphone here. And in doing so, we're very, very much committed to providing affordable, in fact, free, the fastest free Wi-Fi available today. So New Yorkers now have access via links to free gigabit per second Wi-Fi, in addition to being able to use touchscreen tablets on the devices. And we're very much committed to providing the best possible user experience at no cost to the city or to users. And so all of this, much like Facebook or Gmail, is supported by advertising revenue. The revenue which we also share with the City of New York to help them reinvest in social services and their governance of the city. So it's a project we're really proud of. We've made some significant strides here in New York. We have hundreds of units in the ground already since our launch in January of this year. We have hundreds more coming in the months to come. We've had 160,000 users already sign up in the last few months. And in addition to the Wi-Fi services, links also allow for free calls across the United States. So we've actually had 35,000 calls per month made, which really moves the needle on connection. Over the next 8 years, we'll have more than 7,500 units here across New York City, creating a ubiquitous Wi-Fi experience on the island of Manhattan and within certain neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs.
Great. Thanks so much for those insights. And that leads to the great city of San Francisco, which I have the pleasure to visit twice a year. And San Francisco, of course, at the heart of Silicon Valley, not exactly known for being unconnected. Can you tell us the current situation of urban and connected in San Francisco? I know you guys had published a report, and what initiatives are you taking?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share on the discussion. We are the center of technology and innovation, but even we have citizens who are unconnected for various reasons, all of the sorts of reasons that have already been discussed. So we're not satisfied, I guess is the way to put it. And so we have been studying the problem and what we believe to be the root causes very deeply so that we can understand how the government can play a role in solving those issues and bringing a more pervasive, connected life to everyone who either lives, works, or visits San Francisco. So we've studied things like the infrastructure and the state of connectivity and the factors being, again, all the things that were mentioned, costs and digital literacy, and sometimes I think it does come down to access, but all of those things are factors. And so we've been studying this very closely, working towards a plan now to actually figure out a way to bring broadband to every home and business in San Francisco, and also making sure that when that broadband comes to every home and business, that it's in the form of choice, and so that people have the ability to choose a service provider, because we feel like that's a really important element to a quality experience and a truly equitable experience. We are pretty focused on the fact that we don't believe that this is just about dropping off fiber at everybody's curb or giving people, kind of minimal or a different service level experience and then calling it good. We really want to make sure that everybody has gig speeds and everybody has choice and access in their homes and in their places of work and education and socialization.
Following up on that, I would like to ask all of you, why aren't the carriers more involved in those public-private partnerships, and and what lessons have been learned? What partnerships work and which ones don't work?
I think
who wants to react to that?
I can chime in really quick, and then I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts too. I think that the carriers or the private sector has a certain objective, and that objective includes connecting people, but it also includes generating a profit. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, but it is an influence on the strategy for sure, and they are appropriate to maintain that. And so I think what we found is that the internet service is no longer nice to have. It's no longer something of convenience or something of luxury. That it is now a core component of everybody's daily life, and so that's just changed the dynamics. It's the FCC recently has talked about it in the form of a utility, and that just changes the conversation. And it doesn't mean that the private sector, the carriers, don't have a very important role in this. It just means that the mixture of responsibilities and the different stakeholder groups at hand have evolved and changed. And to be very precise with an example, I use this story in San Francisco where we've done a lot with public Wi-Fi up and down 3 miles of Market Street, 33 parks. Every public library has open and unfiltered access to the internet, uncapped. We're delivering 40 and 50 meg speeds at all of those places. to the public or to anybody. And we have kids who are sitting on the steps of a library after the library has closed to stay connected to complete their homework because they don't have connections at home. And so that's just a very salient point that this isn't nice to have. That if it's a fundamental requirement for you to participate in the public education system, I think that is there's no better example of how this has become a must-have than that. And so that's kind of the thing that creates focus, I think, for us is we have to improve that situation. We're very proud that at least we have those options for those people, but we, at the same time, know that we can do better.
Okay. I would like to actually just ask Molly quickly what's her take on public-private partnership, since you guys have built this whole consortium, and then we'll move on to Sonia to give us her perspective, maybe with the view on developing world. So Molly, what is intersection exactly, and how does it work? And
absolutely, thanks, Adlan, and thanks, Miguel. I think we, we're very proud to be part of a successful public-private partnership here in New York. Intersection is one member of a consortium of companies called City Bridge, which came together to respond to a challenge originally under Mayor Bloomberg's administration and then under Mayor de Blasio here to reinvent the payphone. And in doing so, we've formed a strong partnership with the City of New York, who works in lockstep with us in terms of identifying where we're deploying units and in making sure that New Yorkers have access to this service. So I think it's a pretty revolutionary model. As I mentioned before, we have a revenue sharing agreement with the City of New York, so their interests and our interests are very much aligned. And we couldn't agree more with, the UN came out recently saying that access to the internet is a human right. And we're seeing the impacts here in New York every single day. I'm especially proud. Recently, we had one of our colleagues pass by and see someone applying for a job on a link. So the change is real, and it's happening, and we couldn't do it without our partners in the City of New York.
Excellent. Sonia, what's your take on public-private partnership in the developing countries?
Well, it's a little different, to say the least. I think San Francisco and New York are cities that benefit from also massive resources that many developing countries and developing cities don't have, or are much harder to come by. And so there's some really good public-private partnerships taking place in many developing countries. For the most part, many of them are taking place under the kind of financing mechanisms and funding possibilities under wider universal service funds or universal access funds, which I know that the cities in the U.S. and other parts of Western world also benefit from. In developing countries, such as the ones that we work right now, for example, just to give you a few examples, in Nigeria, Ghana, and Mozambique in Africa, where we are working with the different stakeholders exactly to push for these public-private partnerships to be not only established, but to be successful in providing services to the unconnected. The challenges are much greater because, it's not just about not having the coverage, which you already mentioned, but it's about the fact that, for example, in Nigeria, a country of about 175 million people, about 85% of the population lives under the poverty line. So affordability is so incredibly important for people that, in fact, it raises the issue about the possibilities of Wi-Fi. And so we are starting to see a lot more possibilities and opportunities around partnerships to provide public access facilities, not just with Wi-Fi networks, but other kinds of public access facilities that can bring about connectivity options to the poor. But it is a much greater dimension of the problem if you think about it, because of just the sheer size. And so when you think about countries like Myanmar, for example, where we are also working, the issue is a little different. It's a country where networks are being developed right now for the first time after not having anything on the ground for many, many decades. And so public-private partnerships become kind of the default way of functioning. The issue is that and something that we all need to be aware is that it's not just about having the coverage and then having the actual access and then being able to afford. In countries like Myanmar, and this is true actually across many developing regions, device costs are also a key piece of the equation around affordability. So even when we are working to push down the actual cost of the data plans, which are very important, it's a huge element of affordability, the price of the devices are also very important. So you have to look at public-private partnerships not just from an investment perspective, from an implementation perspective, which is what Molly and Miguel were sharing. You have a lot of the kind of framework in place, and you basically have to have the resources to implement a project really well in a planned way. In many developing countries, you don't even have the framework that facilitates that. Not only the investment, the public-private partnership itself, it's a much more complicated process. But it's one that we're moving towards, and I think that, you know, what's happening in many countries right now, and again, Ghana is another good example of that, with much more holistic policy approaches to the problem, not just to create and push for partnerships, but also to allow for other things to happen. For example, we worked very closely with the government in Ghana to eliminate device taxes. So all smartphones were taxed, had about 20% cost as part of their cost in the market, and we managed to eliminate that 20% tax on smartphones as a way to reduce the price of devices, and then, of course, increase the potential of affordability. So basically, the partnerships are not just about the standard, you know, infrastructure investment, but it's a wider type of partnership. And I think in the developing countries, those are becoming much more innovative. They're about all the different pieces of the access value chain.
Interesting. We're almost running out of time, but I would like to ask Shrikant quickly, what's your take on the WBA's position vis-a-vis the carriers' involvement into all this?
Yeah, and then I think I'll go back to the question you asked about how carriers are not involved. And I think it's probably not the right characterization of the issue. And as Miguel said, carriers probably have a different objective, but it's also the way carriers tend to look at connectivity in general is obviously from a sustainability perspective. And that's an issue that drives how not just the carriers are looking at now this issue of connectivity, but even the cities and governments are looking at the connectivity on a sustainable basis. And Miguel mentioned about this wonderful deployment, citywide deployment that San Francisco has initiated, and many other cities have initiated. A lot of that work now obviously is looked at not just as something that has to be done on a free basis, but on a sustainable basis. So going back to carriers and WBA's thinking on this, is that when it comes to deployment of connectivity, for the purpose of getting the unconnected connected, that needs to be supported by a sustainable model. And to facilitate that, in fact, the reason Connected City Advisory Board was set up and is being supported by WBA is because sustainability cannot be a sort of one-sided affair. You have to bring the right partners together who have the resources, capability, motivation, and the ability to provide a sustainable framework for the public and private partners to work together. And that's essentially what the CCAB is developing right now. There is a body of knowledge that's available within certain cities based on work they have done. There's a body of knowledge available within the private partners, including a lot of carriers, whether it's AT&T in US or BT in UK or some of the other carriers in developing markets. They have, in fact, been working quite closely with a lot of stakeholders, even for Wi-Fi, for example, in making sure that the Wi-Fi deployment is done in a sustainable way. And those learnings and knowledge and best practices are being now extended to however the connected city capabilities need to be developed. And to support that work within WBA and the Connected City Advisory Board, there is a program going on called Connected City Blueprint project, which looks at all these various aspects, including the connectivity fabric, including the public-private partnership models, including some of the innovation models that need to be looked at to create connectivity and access to support the availability of internet for everyone. But going beyond that, to do that in a way that's sustainable and can be then supported for other things like smart city vision, smart city services, and beyond.
Great. Thank you, Shrikant. Tiago, I believe we have questions from the audience.
Hi, Adlan. Yes, we have a few questions for the audience, and we are reaching the end of our webinar. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of questions that have been posted on the chat box. So the first question that we received is to you, Shrikant. So this gentleman is asking, how can I participate on Wi-Fi, and his company can get involved on the activities where he can get more information and be active on this initiative from WBI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best thing is to start by visiting the worldwifiday.com website. That in fact has lots of information on what is already being done and what are the venues and opportunities for anyone, whether you are an individual or a company or an organization or a city or any part of the ecosystem, how you can get involved. It could be, in fact, there are various ways you can come and get involved. It could be just simply to voice support for the use of Wi-Fi through some sort of communication, to all the way to launch projects and programs, and even in fact mobilize funding and support from the industry and the stakeholders for the programs and projects that you would like to launch. So there are opportunities available at all levels, right from making the platform to communicate what you are doing and creating visibility for that in terms of projects and programs that you have done, to new things that you want to establish or announce. So the World Wi-Fi Day can be a platform for all that.
Yes, thank you so much, Shrikant. Okay, a second question. Okay, this question is to you, Molly. So this question is about is Intersection looking for partnerships and expansion to other cities and countries, even other cities in the U.S., I believe, and other countries outside the U.S.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Absolutely. We're constantly in talks with other cities to see how we can bring the link model elsewhere and bring Wi-Fi to communities across the globe. So we're definitely interested in hearing from folks who want to learn more. I'd encourage them to go to link.nyc to read up about Link, and make sure to check us out at intersection.com. Additionally, if there are folks that want to connect with our Link team here at Intersection, they can email hello@intersection.com. But yeah, definitely excited to consider future opportunities for the Link model.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly. We are running out of time. I still have some questions. I will share with our panelists all the questions that we received, and we'll respond it by email. So I think we are just 1 minute to close. I don't know, Adlan or any of the panelists, if you like to have any final statement before you close.
Well, then thank you all the panelists and the WBA for organizing this webinar, which it was a pleasure for me to moderate. And I think that closes the event. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
It's been a pleasure hosting you guys. Thank you on behalf of the WBA.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.